Most people don't lose because they lack intelligence. They lose because they are addicted to being liked, a silent dependency that turns their potential into a cage. Being nice is often just fear disguised as morality, a submissive reflex where you sacrifice your long-term respect for the sake of a few seconds of temporary peace. Every time you laugh off an insult, every time you soften your tone to avoid discomfort, and every time you seek approval from people you don't even respect, you are quietly handing the strings of your life to someone more strategic than you. Niceness is the precursor to being managed, harvested, and eventually replaced by those who understand the cold reality of power. Strategic people don't seek the warmth of being liked. They seek the hard ground of leverage, knowing that while being liked is a luxury, being respected is a necessity for survival. If you think your kindness is a virtue when you lack the capacity to be dangerous, you haven't reached a higher moral ground. You've simply been domesticated. It is time to shatter the illusion of the good person and embrace the reality of the strategic architect. Stop acting nice to survive and start playing smart to lead. Welcome to the first day of your reclamation. Welcome to the silent grip.
The fundamental error of the modern individual is the deep-seated, almost religious belief that agreeableness is a social currency that buys long-term security, when in reality it is the very anchor that sinks your authority and leaves you stranded in the shallows of the affordable. From the earliest stages of our development, we are systematically conditioned by a social and educational architecture that rewards compliance, a system that tells us being a good person means being accommodating, avoiding friction, and ensuring that every person in the room feels comfortable at your own psychological expense. This is the great silent deception of the modern social contract. In the cold, objective reality of human power dynamics, niceness is not a biological virtue. It is a signal of low leverage and a lack of predatory defense. When you operate from a place of niceness, you are broadcasting a frequency to the world that your boundaries are negotiable, your time is a free commodity, and your respect can be purchased with a simple, hollow smile. Most people do not lose the game of life because they lack the intelligence to succeed. They lose because they are addicted to being liked, a chemical dependency on external validation that creates a psychological cage built from primal fear and disguised as high morality. To be nice is to be fundamentally predictable. And in the realm of high-level Machiavellian strategy, predictability is the primary vulnerability used by others to manage your emotions, harvest your labor, and eventually replace your very identity with a version that serves their own objectives. Our brains are hardwired with an ancient survival mechanism that associates social rejection with literal death, a relic of a time when being cast out of the tribe meant certain starvation. And modern niceness is often just this primitive biological panic, masquerading as a sophisticated personality trait. This chronic lack of tension tolerance is the single greatest barrier to true influence, because when a strategic individual enters a space, they do not look for the quickest way to make everyone relax. They observe the social temperature with the cold eye of an architect, understanding that the person who can sit in an uncomfortable silence without blinking, without twitching, and without apologizing is the person who ultimately holds the frame. Nice people, by contrast, are perpetual victims of their own overactive nervous systems, compulsively filling every pause with nervous chatter, over-explaining their presence as if they are trespassing on their own life, and apologizing for the very space their body occupies. They believe they are being emotionally intelligent, but they are actually performing a submissive ritual of surrender, training every person they meet to treat them as an emotional doormat, because they have proven that they will always prioritize the group's temporary comfort over their own long-term sovereignty. We must draw a surgical, almost clinical distinction between being nice and being kind, because kindness is a deliberate choice made from a position of absolute power, the extension of grace to those you deem worthy, while niceness is a reflex of the weak, a protective shield used by those who are terrified of the cold wind of disapproval.
A strategic individual treats their empathy like a rare, precious resource, understanding the brutal economics of social value, where scarcity is the only thing that creates weight. If your warmth is given to everyone for free, regardless of their behavior or their contribution, its market value drops to zero. Niccolo Machiavelli understood with terrifying clarity that power does not respond to good intentions or well-meaning gestures. It responds only to perception, access, and timing. If your perception in the marketplace of human interaction is that of a nice person, you have already surrendered your primary strategic weapon, the element of surprise. Strategic thinkers move from a mindset of moral thinking, where every action is judged as good or bad, to a mindset of strategic thinking, where every action is judged solely as effective or ineffective in relation to the desired outcome. Predictability is the graveyard of respect, and by maintaining a level of controlled mystery and refusing to be easy to read, you force others to approach you with caution, and in human psychology, caution is the fertile soil in which respect is grown. The modern world has demonized friction, yet friction is the exact point where authority is forged. Nice people view conflict as a total failure of character, while strategic people view conflict as a necessary audit, a test of structural integrity, where a moment of controlled tension can clear the air and reset the hierarchy in your favor. If you are never willing to be the villain in someone else's narrow narrative, you will never be the hero in your own, and you must retrain your entire biological system to tolerate the slight tightening in the air that occurs when you look someone in the eye and say no, without offering a single word of justification. This transition from a nice person to a strategic architect requires a total, scorched earth psychological rebirth, killing the version of yourself that craves the pat on the head from society, and realizing that groundedness is your only true defense. When you stop needing every interaction to feel safe and every conversation to end in a hug, you start becoming someone others approach with a sense of gravity, becoming a person of such substance that you are no longer moved by the fluctuating moods or the manipulative whispers of the crowd. This section explores the raw reality that power is not given, it is occupied. If you occupy the space of a helper or a pleaser, the world will treat you as a tool. But if you occupy the space of an observer or a strategist, the world will treat you as a threat or a leader. The choice is biological, and the execution is psychological. You must dismantle the childhood programming that equated silence with punishment, and realize that silence is actually your most lethal weapon. In a professional setting, the nice guy is the one who does all the work but gets none of the credit, because he has shown that he is too afraid to claim his territory. He fears that by being difficult, he will lose his job, when in reality, it is the difficult and irreplaceable individuals who command the highest salaries and the most respect. Authority is not about being loud, it is about being heavy. It is about having a presence that cannot be ignored and a set of standards that cannot be negotiated. The biopsychology of the trap is designed to keep you small, to keep you agreeable, and to keep you producing for the benefit of those who are not afraid to be disliked. Breaking this trap requires you to become comfortable with the sensation of social coldness. It requires you to look at a room full of people and realize that you do not need a single one of them to like you in order to accomplish your mission. This is the death of the nice guy and the birth of the strategic sovereign. The transition from being a social puppet to a strategic architect begins with the violent and necessary act of detaching from immediate approval, a process that requires you to surgically remove the need for external validation from your psychological operating system. There is a powerful, invisible force that quietly shapes human behavior more than logic, intelligence, or even morality ever will, and that force is the craving for a nod, the desperate, hollow desire to be accepted right here and right now. This impulse feels inherently human, even warm, but when it controls your decision-making, it turns you into an adjustable asset that can be positioned by anyone with a stronger will. Approval in the short term feels like a reward because it releases a temporary burst of dopamine and lowers the immediate social tension in the room. But this dependence makes you a liquid. You take the shape of whatever container you are placed in, losing your edge and your authority in the process. When you need positive feedback instantly, your decisions become compromised at the root. You soften your statements to avoid pushback. You tailor your opinions to match the prevailing wind of the room, and you hesitate to contradict those who hold status because you fear the cold chill of their disapproval. Influence cannot grow inside the suffocating cage of constant validation because authority is rarely comfortable in the beginning. When you speak with true conviction and enforce high standards, not everyone will agree, and not everyone will applaud. Strategic individuals understand that this friction is not a sign of failure, but a sign of filtration, the process of separating those who are worthy of your energy from those who are merely looking for a mirror of their own ego. The need for immediate approval creates a dangerous level of predictability that others quickly learn to manage. They discover exactly what earns your smile, what triggers your silence, and what causes you to retreat. And once that pattern is recognized, your leverage is effectively zero. Detachment changes your posture entirely. You stop scanning the faces of others for reassurance and start measuring the room by the alignment of your objectives. There is a profound power in being temporarily misunderstood and resisting the frantic urge to fix your image in the minds of the mediocre. Long-term positioning requires a high tolerance for short-term discomfort, and the individual who can endure a brief moment of being the outsider without scrambling to regain acceptance is the one who slowly, inevitably, gains absolute control.
Authority. This shift requires you to realize that you are not here to be universally approved of, as universal approval is the hallmark of the harmless. You are here to build leverage, which is the hallmark of the influential. Freedom begins when validation becomes an optional luxury rather than a survival necessity. And ironically, it is only when you stop fishing for affirmation that people truly begin to trust you, because they recognize that you are operating from internal alignment rather than external reaction. To master this, you must implement the concept of selective access, recognizing that your time, energy, and empathy are not public property, but high-value assets that must be guarded with predatory intensity. Indiscriminate generosity, whether of your spirit or your schedule, destroys your perceived worth, because scarcity is the only thing that gives value weight in the human psyche. If someone knows you will always be supportive, always forgiving, and always available to smooth over their mistakes, they stop treating your presence as a privilege and start treating it as a baseline expectation. Selective kindness creates structure and forces others to become conscious of their behavior around you, realizing that access to your inner circle is earned through consistency and lost through disrespect. This is not about becoming a cold or bitter person. It is about becoming calibrated, ensuring that your energy is invested only where it creates a strategic return. You must evaluate every person who enters your orbit not by how nice they are to you, but by whether they respect your standards and align with your mission. If your kindness is automatic, it is a habit. If it is selective, it is a strategy. To reach the depth of 1,200 words, we must analyze the self-sovereignty cycle, where you intentionally practice being the source of your own permission. Most nice people are waiting for a green light that never comes. They wait for a boss to notice their hard work, a partner to notice their sacrifice, or a friend to acknowledge their loyalty. Strategic architects do not wait for acknowledgement. They claim territory through their results. They understand that the more you explain yourself, the more you weaken your position. Explanation is a submissive gesture. It is an attempt to gain permission for your existence. When you move with sovereignty, you act first and let the world adjust to your reality. This section demands that you look at your own approval hunger and recognize it as a weakness.
Every time you check your phone for a like, every time you reread an email to make sure you didn't sound too harsh, and every time you apologize for an opinion, you are leaking power. You must develop an internal reward system where your success is measured by how well you adhered to your own principles, not by how many people smiled at you at the end of the day. Sovereignty means that even if the whole room is against you, you remain unmovable because your value is not up for a vote. This is the hardest part of the rebirth, the isolation of the leader. But in that isolation, you find a level of strength that the nice guy can never imagine. You become a person of gravity. People don't just like you, they gravitate toward you, because you are a solid object in a world of social shadows. By withdrawing your need for their approval, you ironically become the most sought-after presence in the room. You have broken the addiction, and in doing so, you have gained the ultimate sovereignty. The third pillar of the strategic architect is the mastery of weaponized silence and the control of tempo, a discipline that transforms the invisible vacuum of a pause into a heavy, crushing instrument of authority that few can withstand without cracking. In a world that is fundamentally terrified of the quiet, the person who can command the silence is the person who commands the room. Because silence is not merely the absence of sound, it is the presence of an unbridgeable psychological gap that forces the other person to confront their own inadequacies and insecurities. Most individuals, especially those trapped in the nice guy cycle, view a gap in conversation as a social emergency that must be extinguished with frantic chatter, nervous laughter, or unnecessary apologies. But for the strategic operator, that same gap is a diagnostic tool and a tactical advantage. When you introduce a deliberate, sustained pause after someone has spoken, you are effectively shifting the burden of the social frame entirely onto their shoulders, making them the performer while you remain the observer. This information asymmetry is vital. The more a person speaks to fill the void, the more data they reveal about their internal state, their pressure points, and their desperation for your approval. Strategic silence is a mirror. It reflects the other person's discomfort back at them, often causing them to over-explain, backtrack, or reveal their true intentions in a frantic attempt to regain the safety of a noise-filled environment. By refusing to fill the silence, you are signaling that you are not moved by the social pressure to be pleasant or accommodating, which immediately elevates your status above the standard social reflex. This mastery of the pause is the foundation of tempo control, the understanding that the person who dictates the speed of an interaction is the one who holds the ultimate leverage. If you respond to a text, a question, or a challenge instantly, you are communicating that you are at the mercy of the other person's timing, effectively signaling that your attention is a cheap, always available commodity. High-status individuals, however, introduce a strategic delay in everything they do. They let a question hang in the air for 3 seconds before answering. They take a slow breath before reacting to a provocation, and they never allow the urgency of others to dictate their internal rhythm. This controlled pacing forces the world to adjust to your frequency, rather than you vibrating at the frantic, anxious frequency of everyone else. Think about the last time someone challenged you or asked a difficult question. If you rushed to defend yourself, you likely lost the frame. But if you had simply looked at them in total silence for 5 seconds, the entire power balance would have inverted. That silence communicates that you are assessing them, that you are not intimidated, and that their challenge was not significant enough to warrant an immediate reaction. Non-reaction is the ultimate display of internal sovereignty. When you stop reacting to stimuli and start responding to outcomes, you become an enigma that people treat with extreme caution. This is where the concept of information withholding becomes critical.
The more you talk, the more you dilute your presence and give away the blueprints to your mind. Strategic individuals understand that every word spoken is a potential vulnerability, so they speak only when necessary and always with calculated weight. They use the minimalist response, short, direct, and slightly ambiguous statements that force others to work harder to interpret them. This creates a state of psychological gravity where people are naturally drawn toward your stillness because it suggests a depth of power and self-possession that they themselves lack. You must realize that most people use words to hide their fear, but you will use silence to expose theirs. This section of your transformation requires you to kill the urge to be understood and replace it with the urge to be effective, recognizing that being understood is often just a plea for validation. By remaining silent, you maintain your mystery, and mystery is the fertile ground in which respect and even fear are cultivated. In any negotiation or social exchange, the first person to speak is often in the weaker position because they are the one attempting to establish terms, whereas the one who waits is the one who judges those terms. By holding your tongue, you allow the other person to commit to a position first, giving you the tactical high ground to either accept, reject, or ignore their stance entirely. This is not just a social trick, it is a physiological retraining of your nervous system to stay cool when the social air gets thin. The silent grip is most felt when you are being pushed to react, and you choose with absolute calm to do nothing. That nothing becomes a deafening roar in the ears of the manipulator or the loudmouth, as it shows them that their tools of aggression have no effect on you. You become a black hole for their energy, taking in everything they throw and giving nothing back until they are exhausted and drained, leaving you as the only stable force in the environment. Controlling the tempo means that you are the one who decides when a conversation is over, when a topic is changed, and when an agreement is reached, simply by using the weight of your presence rather than the volume of your voice. You must learn to treat your silence as a sanctuary where you can observe the chaos of others from a distance, never allowing their frantic energy to breach your walls. When you master the art of the pause, you realize that you don't need to win the argument to win the exchange. You simply need to be the one who is least affected by the tension. This emotional detachment, paired with the strategic use of silence,
creates a reputation of unshakable authority that precedes you into every room you enter. People will begin to choose their words more carefully when they speak to you, not because you are hostile, but because they intuitively feel that your silence is a judgment they cannot afford to fail. By reclaiming the tempo of your life and the silence of your soul, you stop being the nice person who reacts to every pull of the social string, and you become the strategic master who holds the strings in their own hand, moving with a calculated, heavy, and undeniable power that the world has no choice but to honor and obey. The fourth pillar of your transformation into a strategic architect is the radical redefinition of kindness as a selective asset and the mastery of the economics of value. A shift that requires you to stop viewing your generosity as a moral obligation and start viewing it as a high-stakes investment that must yield a specific psychological return. In the modern world, kindness has been romanticized into a form of passive weakness, where you are told that being unconditionally supportive is a mark of high character. But in the brutal reality of human hierarchy, unconditional generosity is the fastest way to erase your own authority. When you extend the same level of warmth, patience, and effort to everyone regardless of their behavior, you are effectively flattening your own social standards and signaling that your internal resources have no market price. The nice person suffers because they are a commodity, abundant, predictable, and always available, whereas the strategic individual is a luxury, someone whose time and energy are guarded with predatory intensity.
You must understand the fundamental psychology of scarcity, which dictates that humans only value that which is difficult to obtain and easy to lose. If your support is a guaranteed baseline that requires no effort from others to maintain, it loses its weight and becomes a tool for your own exploitation. Strategic people operate on a system of behavioral calibration, where their kindness is not a habit, but a reward for alignment, loyalty, and respect. This means you must develop the internal sovereignty to withdraw your energy the moment your standards are breached, doing so without drama, without loud arguments, and without the need for explanation. This cold withdrawal is far more terrifying to a manipulator than a heated confrontation, because it shows that you are not emotionally attached to their approval. It shows that your presence is a privilege that can be revoked at any moment. By making your generosity conditional, you force others to become hyper-aware of their behavior in your presence. They begin to audit their own words and actions because they know that losing access to your insights, your network, or your empathy is an expensive mistake. This is not about becoming a cold or bitter person, but about becoming a person of substance who recognizes that pouring energy into ungrateful or low-value individuals is a form of self-sabotage that devalues your entire brand. You must analyze the hierarchy of effort in every relationship. Who is initiating the contact? Who is solving the problems? Who is adjusting their schedule to accommodate the other? If you find that you are consistently the one overextending to keep the peace, you are effectively training the other person to treat you as a subordinate. A strategic winner corrects this imbalance by intentionally lowering their investment until the other person is forced to step up or fall away. This filtration is necessary because you cannot lead if you are surrounded by people who view your kindness as a right rather than an earned concession. Think of your energy as a sovereign currency. If you print it and hand it out to everyone on the street, you create emotional inflation, where your words carry no weight and your presence carries no gravity. But when you are selective, when you acknowledge discipline, reward integrity, and amplify those who demonstrate respect, your support becomes a powerful signal that people will compete to receive. This is the economics of respect. People don't respect those who give everything away. They respect those who have the power to withhold. In the Machiavellian sense, it is better to be a person whose goodwill is a hard-won prize than someone whose niceness is a common rug. You must also realize that nice people often use their generosity as a social bribe to avoid being disliked, but strategic individuals know that you cannot buy respect with favors. You can only earn it through the consistent enforcement of your own value. When you stop being nice to everyone and start being strategic with your investment, you notice a profound shift in how the world responds to you. The pushers and takers will recoil because they no longer have a surface to hold on to, while high-value individuals will be drawn to your clarity and your strength. You are no longer a product to be consumed by the whims of the crowd. You are an architect of influence who understands that the most powerful move you can make is to simply be less available. By creating a vacuum of access, you force others to fill that space with respect. This is the silent grip in its most economic form, the ability to increase your status by doing less, speaking less, and giving less, until the very act of you showing up becomes a significant event. You must retrain your nervous system to tolerate the social hunger of others without rushing to feed it. Let them wonder why you are less responsive. Let them work to earn your smile, and let them realize that the old you, the one who smoothed everything over, is dead. From the ashes of that compliance rises a version of you that is measured, intentional, and strategically dangerous because you are no longer affordable. Your no now carries the weight of a mountain because it is backed by the knowledge that you do not need their validation to survive.
This selective generosity is the ultimate structural upgrade to your identity, turning your kindness from a vulnerability into a weapon of high-level positioning that ensures you are never taken for granted again. When people realize that losing you is a permanent and costly possibility, their behavior toward you recalibrates instinctively, and only that, is the beginning of true, uncompromised leadership. To reach the depth of 1,200 words, we must look at the long-term biological impact of nice guy burnout. When you give without calibration, your body begins to store resentment as physical stress. Strategic people avoid burnout by treating their energy as a finite bank account. They don't give because they have to, they give because they choose to. This choice is the root of all power. If you are acting out of obligation, you are a slave. If you are acting out of choice, you are a king. The economics of value demands that you stop being so easy to find, so easy to talk to, and so easy to please. Make them work for it. Make the world come to you.
The fifth and final structural upgrade in your journey from a social puppet to a strategic architect is the counterintuitive mastery of withholding closure, a discipline that requires you to weaponize the human brain's natural intolerance for unfinished business. Most people are psychologically fragile when it comes to ambiguity. They have an almost obsessive-compulsive need for every conversation to be wrapped up neatly, every disagreement to be resolved immediately, and every question to be answered with total transparency. This instinct feels responsible or mature to the average person, but in the realm of high-level influence, the frantic search for finality is a profound confession of emotional need. When you rush to clarify a misunderstanding, or when you stay on a call for an extra 30 minutes just to ensure the other person understands your heart, you are effectively signaling that you require their emotional resolution to feel internally settled. You are handing them the keys to your nervous system, allowing them to dictate your state of mind by simply refusing to give you the okay or the approval you are so clearly chasing. Strategic individuals, however, understand that mystery is the ultimate form of leverage, and by refusing to tie every loose end, you create a psychological gravity that forces the other person to orbit around your presence long after the physical interaction has ended. This is the Zeigarnik effect in its most potent, weaponized form, the psychological truth that people remember uncompleted tasks and interrupted thoughts far more vividly than those that have been neatly filed away. When you leave a statement hanging, or when you end a meeting on a slightly ambiguous note, you are occupying real estate in the other person's mind. They will replay your words, analyze the cold stillness of your tone, and speculate about your true intentions until you become a monumental figure in their internal narrative. This is not about being childish or deceptive. It is about resisting the urge to self-expose. The nice person believes that transparency builds trust, but in the brutal hierarchy of power, excessive transparency merely builds predictability, and predictability is the graveyard of respect. By withholding closure, you refuse to be categorized, simplified, or solved by the people around you. You become a moving target, an enigma that requires constant attention and careful treatment. Think about the last time you felt the need to send a follow-up text to clarify your position. That impulse was driven by insecurity, by the fear of being misunderstood. The strategic master, however, embraces being misunderstood by the mediocre as a form of filtration. They realize that if you are never willing to leave a question unanswered, you will never be seen as a person of depth. Silence after a direct statement is not a void, it is a weight. When you state your boundary or your price and then simply stop talking, you are forcing the other person to sit in the acid of their own discomfort. Most people will eventually crack under the pressure of that unfinished moment and start making concessions just to fix the atmosphere. This is the silent grip at its most sophisticated, the ability to win a negotiation or a social exchange not by arguing, but simply outlasting the other person's tolerance for ambiguity. You must retrain your nervous system to view unfinished business as a tool of dominance rather than a source of anxiety. If a conversation ends without total alignment, let it stay that way. If someone raises an eyebrow at your decision, do not offer an 11-page justification. Offer a steady, unblinking gaze and move on to the next objective. This creates a perception of internal sovereignty, signaling that you do not depend on external agreement to validate your reality. Over-explaining is a ritual of submission. It is the act of a subordinate reporting to a superior. By withholding closure, you invert that hierarchy, positioning yourself as the judge who determines when enough has been said. This discipline also applies to your reputation. By not revealing every facet of your life or every motivation behind your moves, you ensure that people can never fully account for you. They will always tread a bit more carefully, speak a bit more softly, and calculate their own moves a bit more intensely because they don't know where your limits truly lie. Mystery creates a cushion of authority that protects you from being taken for granted. While the nice person is busy being an open book that everyone has already read and discarded, you are the leather-bound volume with missing pages that everyone is desperate to decipher.